back to another sewing tutorial. I'm really excited for today's sewing tutorial. I've been wanting to make this for a while now because I feel like the Josephine dress is such a must-have in everyone's closet. It's like the perfect dress for a night out, for a date night, maybe if you're invited to a wedding. Yeah, it's just like such a beautiful piece of clothing. It's like this slip-on dress with a cowl neckline or waterfall neckline. I call it waterfall neckline usually. And then we have super long straps that we can tie on the shoulder, and then the straps are hanging down. And it's just like a super, super nice dress in my opinion. And I've been wanting to make this for a while, but I was waiting for a package to arrive from my mom because she sent me some fabrics that I had bought in Barcelona a while ago. And it's this beautiful fabric. I don't know right now the composition of the fabric anymore, but I'll find it out and I'm gonna write it here. I bought it at a fabric store called Doc's Textiles, and they don't have an online store, so maybe if you live in Barcelona then you can go there and try if they still stock the fabric. But yeah, I'm usually not a person that wears red, but I feel like when you're tan, I don't know, like I never wear red, but then when I bought this fabric and I saw the color, like it's such a rich, beautiful color. So yeah, I'm gonna make it because it's Valentine's Day in a few days, so I can wear it on Valentine's Day. And I'm gonna link the sewing pattern down below. You can print it out in A4 or in A0 or in US letter. I printed mine out in A4 because I want to teach you again or show you again today how to put a sewing pattern together and how to cut it out. There's quite a few pages. I think it was 28 pages, so I'm gonna be doing that on the floor today. Like my table is not gonna be big enough for it. And I'm gonna be also using my overlock machine and my normal sewing machine. But you don't need an overlock machine. I know I always say this, but you really don't. Like everything I'm doing with my overlock machine, you can just do it with your normal sewing machine at the zigzag option. Because everything I'm doing with my overlock machine, I'm just finishing off the raw edges so they don't fray anymore. And then I'm also going to be using just like the basics. We don't need anything special today. We just need fabric scissors, measuring tape, then we need some pins to pin our fabric together, and I always like pinning my sewing pattern onto the fabric, but if you want to you could also use some chalk. And because for the long straps I like mine to be super thin, so I'm going to be using my loop turner, but you could also just use a safety pin, completely up to you. But if you really enjoy sewing, then maybe just buy one of the loop turners because they save a lot of time. And that's it, that's all we need for today. And now I think I should stop talking and we can start gluing our sewing pattern together. If you printed yours out in A0, you can just skip this part and go to where we start cutting out the fabric. So I just finished sewing my dress, and because the last time I made this dress was more than 5 months ago, I think, so now making the dress again brought back some memories. So I quickly wanted to share my main tips for you before you start sewing, and the number one would be take your time cutting out the fabric, unless like maybe it was just a problem for me because I'm not used to working with like silky slippery fabrics. So for me it was really important that I took my time, that I made sure I'm cutting it out slowly, that everything is pinned on properly, and also it's very important that you place the sewing pattern at the right angle onto your fabric to give it the stretch that we want. So yeah, take your time cutting it out perfectly, because the rest of the dress is so quick and super easy to make. Like it's really a quick dress to make, so really take your time at the beginning to cut out your fabric. And the second thing that I want to say, it is a short sexy mini dress. If you want it to be a bit longer, I would recommend you to add some centimeters at the beginning when you cut out the fabric, and then you could always make it shorter, but that's just a little tip so you don't sew the dress and then you're shocked that it's a mini dress, which I'm sure you wouldn't be because you see the photo of what it looks like when you buy the sewing pattern. But yeah, I just wanted to make that clear again before you start sewing. If you want it to be a bit longer, just add some centimeters length to it before cutting out the fabric. The first thing you always want to do when you print out a sewing pattern is to measure one of the square boxes here. I'm gonna measure the one with the 5 centimeters times 5 centimeters. And it's very important when you print out your sewing pattern that you set the scale to 100%, otherwise the sewing pattern won't be printed out in the right scale. So once the first page is printed out correctly, then you can go ahead and print out all the other pages. I always first put everything together very roughly, just so I know where everything belongs. And it always goes like this. So here we start with A1, and then it goes A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, A7. And then B1, B2, B3, all the B's down. And then we do the same with the C, goes down here, and then D down here. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, so I would always recommend just putting everything together roughly, and then we can go ahead and glue it together page by page before we cut it out. So here we have A1 and here we have B1, and what we want to do, we put B1 on top of A1, and here where the dotted line is, we want to put it right there where the dotted line is, and then also this dotted line needs to line up with this one on A1. And then we take B2, put it on top of B1 and A2. And here the dotted line needs to line up, and then we put it right where the dotted line here is, and this dotted line also needs to line up. So here we have the size key, and when you download your sewing patterns, there will be a separate file with some information about the sewing pattern with a size guide, and I'm a size small, so I'm just gonna follow my yellow lines. But even if you print it out in black and white, you can just follow your dotted line because all sizes have a different dotted line. But yeah, now it's time to cut everything out. So I just want to make sure that we all have the same amount of sewing pattern pieces cut out now. We need to have the front, we need to have the back, and then the back facing. And then for the straps, I have made two different pattern pieces. I'm just gonna go back a bit. So we have the shorter one and the longer one. And the shorter one we're gonna use for the front, and the longer one we're gonna use for the back. And we need to cut out all pattern pieces on bias, which means don't put it like this, don't put it like this, but put it like this, because this way the fabric drapes so much more nicer. And also for the straps, I would recommend you to do it because it is so much easier flipping them inside out when working with like silky satin fabric when it's cut on bias, especially when you want to make thin straps. So yeah, all pattern pieces need to be cut out on bias, and unless you have a super big table, I would recommend you cutting it out on the floor, because you don't want the fabric to be hanging down on the sides, because then the whole fabric will be pulled and the sewing pattern won't be cut out properly. So I'm also going to do it on the floor, and I would recommend you to also cut out your fabric on the floor. So here's how I place everything on my fabric. Everything needs to be cut out once except the two straps. So this one needs to be cut out twice, and this one over here also needs to be cut out 2 times. So the first thing we're doing now is we're gonna sew our straps. Here's one of my straps, and as you can see, this side here is more shiny than this side. So the shiny side is my good side. And what we want to do is we want to fold it in half. And now I'm going to sew along the folded edge here. And now it depends a bit how wide you want your straps to be. I want mine to be quite thin, so I'm going to sew relatively close to my edge here. I have my stitch length set to 2.5, and then I'm actually moving my needle to the left side. This way I can sew closer to my folded edge to make my straps thinner. And I'm gliding now my folded edge along the 1 centimeter line, but because I moved my needle to the left, I'm not sewing with 1 centimeter seam allowance, but more with 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, just because I want my straps to be thinner, but that's up to you. So I'm gonna cut off some of the excess fabric now because this will make it easier flipping the strap the other way. Then I take my loop turner, push it in here till it comes out on the other side again.
And now you just have to repeat exactly the same steps for the other 3 straps. I didn't film it because I thought it would be too boring filming the same thing 3 times, but yeah, you know what to do, so just do it to the other straps now.
Now we're gonna start focusing on the back of the dress, and here we have the back facing, and up here we have our 2 notches where the straps need to go, so we're gonna focus on the bottom part of it, and I'm just gonna overlock it from here till here.
And as you can see, my overlock thread is not red, and in my opinion it's not very important because you really won't see it. I think it's just important that your normal thread for your normal sewing machine is red because those are the stitches you will see when you hem the dress.
So here we have the back facing now. Right now this is the good side because it's more shiny and it looks nicer, so I want the bad side facing me. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to fold this overlocked seam up, so towards the bad side, and I'm just going to sew along it from one end all the way to the other side. Here we have our 2 straps, and now because we focus on the back we want to make sure that we're using our long straps, so I put the short ones away. And then we're taking the back piece of our dress, and an easy way to make sure which is the top and which is the bottom is if you fold it in half, and the short side here is the top of the back of the dress. And now I want the good side facing me. Here's the bad side, and I want the shiny side to face me. And now I take my 2 straps and I place them where our 2 notches are. And then we take the back facing, and we want the good side facing each other. We place it here, and now we sew along here.
And we are sewing with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and I would recommend sewing over the straps twice, like front and back stitch, just to make sure that they're not coming undone again.
And now we're gonna overlock from here to here. And what we want to do now is, now we want the 2 good sides facing us, and now we're gonna do a top stitch, and we're gonna sew the seam allowance here onto the back facing. So we're just gonna start sewing here all the way until the other end, and while you sew, just make sure that you pull the back facing and the back slightly apart like this. I just had my lunch break, and while I was eating lunch, the post lady came and she brought me a package which I'm really excited about. It's from a company called Madame So. They reached out to me on Instagram and asked me if they can give me some pieces, and of course I said yes. And there's some really cool things in this package here, like some things that I've never tried before, so I think I'll make a YouTube video or maybe on Instagram showing you the stuff that I got and how to use it. For example, there was like this 3-piece wide rolled hem set, and then there's like those feet that you put on your sewing machine to help you make a hem, which looks so cool, and I'm really excited to try that out. But the cool thing that was in there that's actually very useful for today's tutorial is the sewing clips, because sometimes when you work with like silk fabric or satin fabric, when you put a needle through there, it can leave like a little hole in it. So I would actually recommend you to use those clips to clip the fabric together. So for the rest of the tutorial, I'm going to be using these ones here. So excited. Okay, but let's continue sewing our dress. So now it's time to focus on the front of the dress, and what we want to do now is we're gonna focus on this part here, and we're just gonna overlock it first. And now we're doing the same that we did to the back lining. So now we have the bed side facing us, and what we want to do is we're gonna fold again the overlocked seam up and sew along it. So we're gonna fold the overlock towards the bed side of the fabric. And what we want to do now is we want to sew in the straps for the front, and we're gonna fold this in half. And here where the notch was, where it says on the sewing pattern fold here, is where we now fold the fabric. So this is what it will look like. Can you see it? Let me turn this. So just make sure that where it is clipped, that's the half, and then just everything, like all the armhole, everything down here just needs to line up. But for now, we're just gonna sew this part and then sew in the strap here, and the same on the other side. So I'm taking one of my straps now, and I'm gonna put it right where the little clip was, the little notch. So now we just want to sew along here, and the same along here with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now we want to sew the front and the back together, and right now I have the front piece laying in front of me, and here we have the good side facing me. And now I take my back piece and I make sure that the good sides are facing each other, so the bad side of the back is facing me. And now I want to put the back piece right here in between the two front layers. So I'm gonna put it right there, up there in the corner. Gonna pin it in here. And now we're just gonna pin everything together. So now we're gonna sew along here. So now that this side is sewn together, we're gonna do exactly the same to the other side.
And before overlocking our side seams, I would recommend you to press them open with your iron. Just make sure that maybe if you're working with polyester or silk, maybe you need to change the settings of your iron because you really don't want your fabric to burn.
So now we need to overlock it, and first we're gonna overlock this part, and then we're gonna overlock from over here till down here, and then we're gonna do exactly the same on the other side. So first here, and then along the side here.
And every time when we sew with our normal sewing machine, we can just front and back stitch, and then we can cut the excess thread off. But with our overlock, we can't front and back stitch. So now I'm going to show you what I do with my overlock thread, because you don't just want to cut it off, because otherwise it will come undone again. So I'm taking a needle with a big hole, and the needle is bigger than normal needles and not sharp. So I'm pushing it first through the overlock part, and then I'm putting the excess thread through the hole, then I pull it out, and then I cut it off.
Now it's time to hem the dress. That's the last step that's to do now. And I would recommend you to try your dress on now to really figure out how long or short you want your dress to be. And then you can just, depending how wide you want your hem to be, you can fold it up once and then you can fold it up again. We are now finished sewing our Josephine dress, and I have to say I really had so much fun sewing this dress. It takes quite some time cutting out the fabric just because you really need to make sure that it's cut out perfectly. But then actually sewing the dress is super quick. Like there's not a lot of steps, so I had a lot of fun sewing this. And I'm gonna show you what mine looks like worn in a few seconds. But if you followed this tutorial, please send me your photos or tag me in your stories or videos. I would love to see it. And I post sewing tutorials here on YouTube every day, so I really hope I see you next week at my next sewing tutorial. Goodbye!